come closer to the fire. Maine keeps a hard edge where the water lifts its shoulder against the land. Near Bar Harbor stands a light that retired its lamp years ago, but storms still find a beam where no lens turns. This isn't a tale about ghosts asking to be believed. It is a record of a coastline that remembers how to point a way through weather, and of the people who learn to let it.
This story belongs to a maintenance supervisor named Cole Whitaker, a man whose calendar smelled of salt and machine oil. He kept the keys to a scatter of municipal buildings, the little pump house by the shore path, the bandstand that learned every summer how to do its job again, and the decommissioned lighthouse on a rock that the town adopted when the Coast Guard handed it over. He was not sentimental. He counted tasks with the stoicism of a tide table. Scrape, paint, replace, grease, record. His truck bed always held a coil of rope, a bucket, and a ledger that only made sense to him. The light had been dark officially since the automation era decided the new offshore tower did the work better. The Fresnel lens had been removed, crated, and shipped to a museum 2 counties away where it sat inside glass that protected glass. The keeper's house had surrendered to tours on Saturday afternoons when the weather behaved, and to photographs the rest of the time. The old lamp room wore its vacancy with a dignity that salty iron learns. Cole visited twice a month, more in winter. He walked the ramp, checked the locks, and noted whether storms had tossed pebbles where they had no right to be. The lantern deck offered that wide view New England sells without apology. Granite shouldering out of dark water, a thin seam where cloud and sea negotiated, spruce on the shore holding the line of town. On calm days, the rock was a postcard. On rough days, it became the honest version of itself. The first time the beam appeared on his watch, he thought the mind can embarrass itself with memory. A nor'easter worked the bay like someone tugging a sheet. The automated offshore beacon threw its regulated blink into the spray. Yet along the low run of water between the point and the shipping lane, a tight white fell and rose on a sweep that did not match any charted rhythm. He looked for a boat that might explain it, and saw only weather arranged by purpose. He raised his phone, then lowered it. Cameras confirm and they also reduce. He watched instead and filed it where stubborn people file the things they will later verify. By morning, the town behaved as if the storm had never been a problem. The power crews did their parade down Mount Desert Street. The fishermen at the co-op arranged their crates in the wet light that follows a front. Cole wrote a single line in his ledger and underlined it once. He was not a man given to multiple underlines. Storms repeated through spring with the regularity of anything that likes its job. A beam that should not exist returned only when the weather argued loud enough to drown an explanation. It did not appear early or linger. It arrived in the hour when the wind had finished making its case, and the sea began to settle from fury to heavy breathing. The sweep did not care about tourists, and it did not raise a town's temperature. It treated each event like a shift that begins and ends on time. Cole tested what he could. He checked the breaker panel that had fed the lantern a lifetime ago. It was cold metal and sensible dust. He traced the conduit up the spiral, found splices taped by people who had learned their trade when tape came in one color, and confirmed the obvious. Nothing electrical had the energy to pretend to be a star. He borrowed a handheld meter from a friend at the marina. The reading wavered toward noise, while the beam ran and returned to boredom when it faded. He chalked that up to static that weather breeds. Fishermen are worse than barometers and better than maps. A few of them mentioned a sweep in the corner of their eyes on the nights when the bell buoy seemed to move closer than the bell had any right. They said it without needing to say it. The offshore tower did what it always does: patient, correct, far. But something tight and near found the channel, the way an old hand finds a tool on a dark workbench. No one looked eager to hold a meeting about it. Good towns let useful facts live at the scale that lets them work. A retired teacher who lived year-round on the point sent the harbor master a note that her living room had flickered pleasantly during the last gale, even though she had switched off the lamps to spare the grid. The harbor master placed the note in a drawer with slips that did not require reward. The drawer contained guarantee cards for radios, a badge a summer ranger had left behind, and a child's drawing of a lighthouse beam that was entirely too strong for the crayon it was born of. Cole settled into the idea slowly. The light did no harm, asked for no announcement, and spared him meetings. It arrived to do a piece of the job its lens had once done, and left before anyone could complain. He made a space for it in the ledger, just a narrow column with dates and the word seen. Decommissioned buildings do not forget the verbs that name them. The keeper's quarters smelled of cedar and salt so honestly that tours required no guide. In a closet that now held extra rope and a stack of donated raincoats, Cole found a wooden box with the kind of latch a careful person makes. Inside lay a thin book, the keeper's private log from the last man to live full-time with the lamp. The official station log had gone to the archives. This was the diary of the rhythms that do not fit paperwork. The writing was blunt and clear, a habit formed by someone who worked with weather rather than opinion. Pages listed day shapes, barometer drop and fog steps, paint scraped from south window, gull repelled with dignity, lamp polished to the standard of a pride that is not vanity. The last weeks before automation carried a tone he recognized from other trades when machines begin to stand in the place where hands used to earn their nights. The man had trained his successor on maintaining what would remain: stairs, glass, dignity. One entry held. It described a storm and a sweep that matched nothing on the schedule. The keeper wrote that the lamp had been shuttered for maintenance when the weather arrived, that the lens sat quiet on its cradle, and that the room had nevertheless filled with the kind of brightness that makes details precise rather than theatrical. The beam had swept once and again, not from the lens but from the bluff itself, as if the geometry had been borrowed from the memory of angles rather than from optics. He did not say miracle. He wrote that the sea had accepted instruction and that a small boat out beyond the furthest rock corrected its course with gratitude that would never have a name. Cole closed the book and placed it back in the box with a care that surprised him. He cleaned the latch and oiled the hinge. He did not add a note because some objects do not need a second voice. Some misled visitors with postcards and then remembered who it was. On a hot day that smelled of sunscreen and rope, the forecast held out its hand and asked the town to be reasonable. By late afternoon, the first drops arrived sideways. The offshore tower clicked through its cadence. The ferry to the island adjusted to a shuffle the captain had learned the hard way. Police tape appeared at the end of a pier in that careful, municipal way that still allows stubborn people to step around it. Cole walked the ramp at 11 with his hood up and the sort of balance that comes from making peace with slick steps. The rock shook itself like a large animal. The lantern room glass had been cleaned the week before and now offered the satisfying insult of being immediately dirty in an admirable way. He made the circuit, felt each bolt with his palm the way mechanics touch and read, and then stood with the simple invitation a person offers a tide when there is no conversation to be had. The beam did not come with ceremony. It presented itself as clarity learned from long use. It traveled the arc the lens had taught the room and laid down a lane of white along the water as clean as chalk on a blackboard. It did not fight the offshore tower. It collaborated at a shorter distance with the immediate human scale a small boat cares about. The foghorn sounded in the throat of the channel with that unembarrassed sorrow it has. For 1 minute, the lighthouse that owned no light behaved with all the confidence of being itself. A skiff that had no business still being out there became slightly less wrong. The bow found a better angle against the wind, the way the hand finds a stair rail in the dark and learns about gravity again. It was not a rescue. It was a correction. The sweep repeated once, then again, then stopped as if the room had put the tool back in its drawer. Cole did not applaud, because the sea accepts neither applause nor pity. He noted the hour, the direction, the duration. He walked down in the rain with the same concentration he used on the way up. Back in the truck, he wrote the single line the ledger required. The heater scented the cab with wet wool and rubber. The night finished its statement and began the quiet after clause. Bar Harbor carries tourists with politeness and year-rounders with muscle memory. In a small town, information travels the way fog does, through trees, around corners, reappearing as something other parts of the town already know. The beam became not a myth and not a notice but a courtesy. A lobsterman who had lost patience with a jammed winch said his hand steadied when the sweep walked the water to port. A kayaker who should have been home an hour earlier felt his ribcage loosen when a lane of brightness made the black surface look less like an argument. A Coast Guard petty officer with no time for romance logged the offshore beacon as functioning and wrote nothing about the other light, because forms do not invite that kind of truth. Cole collected nothing but dates and weather shapes. He is not the person who tells a story before it is ready. He cleaned the paint from a hinge and watched a set of tourists take a picture with a kind of reverence that had nothing to do with the beam and everything to do with their vacation, surviving the moodiness of a coast. He replaced shingles on the lee side where the wind had begun to test arguments. He took a school group to the base of the stair, described the Fresnel in a way that made a fourth grader understand liking a lens, and left out the part about storms. Children have their own currents. Adults do not get to steer them toward legend on purpose. That autumn, a local historian who knew which doors to knock on asked the museum 2 counties away for a loan of the lens. The museum sent paper and a polite refusal anchored to insurance and the difficulty of moving fragile greatness through such rude air. The historian stopped trying because she had wanted the conversation, not the object. The town did not need the lens back. The rock already broadcast what it remembered when asked. A winter gale promised to be educational. Cole carried a portable logger in the pocket of his rain shell that he'd borrowed from the university's marine lab. He did not ask permission because the device had been orphaned on a shelf, and institutions like their people to use tools. The logger woke when the magnetic field around it tilted and recorded nonsense and music with equal respect. He stood 3 storms in a row on the landing, halfway up the stair, and let the room teach his ears the difference between fear and instruction. During the second storm, the offshore light vanished and reappeared inside its own rules. The beam from the dark lighthouse ran for 52 seconds in 3 passes, each pass tighter and more sure than the last. The logger showed a brief and arrogant quiver at a frequency that lived where old transformers hum when they are happy. He could not prove it later to anyone who did not already want to believe, and he had no appetite for that audience. He copied the data to a cheap drive and taped the drive inside the wooden log box beneath the private diary, a kind of offering to the sensible gods of record-keeping. He tried one human experiment he regretted before he finished it. He carried a small battery lantern to the base of the bluff and lifted it once the sweep began, thinking to see whether light liked company. The beam ignored him with the dignity of a master craftsman who does not adjust for an apprentice mid-task. He set the lantern down and let the sea do its math. The beam finished, paused half its usual interval, returned for a final small arc as if to acknowledge the thought, and stopped. He learned what he should have known. Some systems only become visible when you stop participating. Whenever the beam failed to appear, he stood without impatience. Not every storm demands guidance. Some only want attention. On those nights, the offshore tower did its clockwork. The foghorn did its sorrow, and the rock held its counsel. He gave the weather his hat brim and his presence, and left with no more to say. Years stack in maritime towns, the way rope coils. Each loop lies against the last, and both remember the hand that placed them. The Lighthouse continued its twice monthlies, then more when the forecasts recommended humility. The ledger grew weight at the back, where pages filled with a narrow language. Gale, nor'easter, swell from southeast, seen. A spring tide lifted higher than anyone liked and took a section of walkway, but left the lantern deck alone in the way the sea reserves for things it respects. When Cole retired, the town gave him a cake that pretended to be the shape of the rock and a watch that knew better than weather. He left the keys in the drawer where the next person would expect them. He slid the wooden log box a few inches to the left so its latch would clear a stubborn lip, the kind of move one leaves behind when one is done teaching. He walked the ramp one last time in daylight and told the place nothing, because places do not want speeches. He went home to a house that had learned the rhythm of his boots. That autumn, a storm arrived with such sincerity that even the souvenir stores closed without pretending it was optional. The offshore tower ran its metronome. The beam from the dark light began before anyone needed it and lasted just long enough for every window facing the bay to feel a brief, clinical calm. Restaurant staff who had stacked chairs on tables stopped for the length of a breath and recognized something they did not sign for but were willing to accept. A single late sailboat on a mooring tightened its line as if muscles had been added to rope. I stood at the shore path under a hood that did little and watched the rock hold itself steady against a world that had other plans. The beam swept in that efficient arc, not a performance, a function. The rain flattened for a moment inside its lane, and then remembered verticality. The foghorn sounded with its old grammar. The hill behind me gathered the sound and returned it without boasting. The light ended itself and left a cleaner dark behind, the way a good ending should. The lens in the museum 2 counties away continued to sit with its self-importance inside glass. School groups learned vocabulary words about prisms. The volunteer did not know she was telling half a truth, and therefore did an excellent job. The town at the Rock did not envy the museum its object. The Rock had kept the thing that mattered, the habit. In the keeper's quarters, the private diary and the cheap drive balanced each other like 2 neighbors who wave from porches and do not require more. The next supervisor wrote smaller than Cole and did not underline. She brought a thermos and left it on the 3rd stair during weather, which taught the room a new detail to carry without remark. When storms lift their shoulder against the land, the lighthouse that owns no lamp still lays down a strip of precision across the throat of the bay. It is not a miracle. It is a muscle memory the place has refused to surrender.
Not every light needs a bulb. Some places shine because they remember how. Out near Bar Harbor, a retired tower keeps its promise when the water turns difficult. If you're there in weather, don't ask it to explain. Let the beam make its pass. Let the horn carry the note. And walk home by the lane they leave behind. Fires do this. So do old rooms. They go on working after the world says they're done.